The heart monitor was screaming when the nurse leaned in and whispered, "Ma'am, I think you deserve to know the truth." The room smelled like antiseptic and fear, and the old man on the hospital bed squeezed the woman's hand like it might be the last thing he ever touched. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and how old are you? And let me ask you something that will sit with you through this whole story. If love found you at the weakest moment of your life, would you trust it or would you run? You see, the woman standing beside that bed didn't look like someone with power. She wore a faded cardigan, no jewelry, no makeup, hair pulled back like she didn't want attention. Her name, at least the one everyone knew, was Margaret Lewis, 62 years old, widowed, quiet. But what no one in that room knew yet was that Margaret was one of the wealthiest women in the country, a self-made billionaire who had spent 4 decades building an empire and 1 lifetime failing at love. After her second divorce, she made a decision that shocked even herself. She didn't want a man who loved her money, her status, or the safety she could provide. She wanted a man who would love her when she had nothing. So she disappeared. Different city, different name. A small rented apartment near a public hospital. No assistants, no drivers. Just her and the truth she was brave enough to test. That's where she met Henry Walker. Henry was 70. A retired school janitor with bad knees, kind eyes, and a voice that always sounded like he was apologizing for taking up space. They met in the hospital cafeteria, of all places, both waiting on test results they were pretending not to be scared of. He offered her half his sandwich without knowing her name. No flirting, no agenda, just kindness. And if you've ever been lonely later in life, you know how powerful simple kindness can feel. They started talking, then laughing, then sitting together every week. Henry never asked about her past, never pushed. He talked about his late wife like she was still sitting at home watching old game shows. He talked about growing old and being invisible. Margaret listened, and something inside her softened in a way money had never touched. Months passed. Love crept in quietly. No dramatic gestures, just presence. And eventually Henry asked her to marry him with a cheap ring and shaking hands, saying, "I don't have much, but I know how to stay." If you were in her place, what would you have done? Margaret said yes, but she still didn't tell him the truth. Then came the night everything changed. Henry collapsed at home, pain tearing through his chest. The ambulance lights painted the walls red and blue, and Margaret rode with him holding his hand, praying silently to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. At the hospital, nurses rushed, doctors shouted numbers, and she was told to wait, to sit, to breathe. That's when Nurse Elena noticed something strange. Elena had worked that floor for 20 years. She'd seen rich families parade in with suits and lawyers, and she'd seen poor men die alone. Margaret didn't fit. Her posture, her calm under pressure, the way she spoke to doctors, not demanding, but confident. And then Elena overheard a phone call Margaret took in the hallway, her voice low but sharp, discussing board votes, assets, and a private jet being on standby. Elena's eyes widened, not because of the money, but because she'd just seen Henry earlier that week, telling another patient how lucky he was to have finally found someone simple and honest. When Henry was stabilized and moved to a private room, Elena couldn't shake it. That look on his face, that trust, and the secret sitting like a loaded gun between them. So she did something nurses aren't supposed to do. She spoke from the heart. She pulled Margaret aside near the hospital bed, machines humming between life and death, and said quietly, "He loves you for who he thinks you are. And if you don't tell him the truth now, you might break him worse than this heart attack ever could." Margaret felt the room spin, all her control, all her power, gone in a second. She looked at Henry, pale, fragile, still trying to smile at her like she was his safe place. Tears burned her eyes. This was the moment she had designed her entire plan around. And suddenly, she was terrified. Because what if the truth didn't just change how he saw her, but erased the love completely. She walked back to the bed, sat down, and took Henry's hand again. He squeezed back weakly and whispered, "Hey, you okay, Maggie?" And she opened her mouth to speak. That's when the door creaked open, and someone from her past stepped inside the room. The man who walked in froze when he saw her. Expensive suit, silver watch, the kind of posture you don't forget when you've spent years giving orders. "Margaret," he said softly, like the name still belonged to him. Henry's eyes flicked between them, confused, still weak, still trusting. The room went quiet, except for the steady beep of the monitor, and in that moment Margaret realized fate had cornered her. Not gently, not kindly. Right here, on a hospital bed, with no place left to hide. "Do you know him?" Henry asked, his voice thin but steady. Margaret felt her chest tighten. She could lie again. She could wave it away. She had lied to presidents and boards and courts before. But never like this. Never to someone who had given her his heart without asking for anything in return. She swallowed and said, "Yes, I do. And there's something I need to tell you. All of it." The man in the suit tried to speak, but Margaret raised her hand. For once in her life, power wasn't about control. It was about honesty. She turned back to Henry, tears finally falling, and told him the truth. Not in grand speeches, not in numbers. She told him she wasn't poor. She told him she wasn't simple. She told him she had hidden because she was tired of being loved for the wrong reasons. And then she said the words that scared her most. "I don't know if you'll still want me after this, but I couldn't let you wake up without knowing who you really married." Henry didn't speak right away. His hand loosened in hers just slightly, and that tiny movement felt like a knife. If you were watching this unfold from the doorway, you'd swear the room itself was holding its breath. Finally, Henry asked, "Is any of what we had real?" His eyes weren't angry. They were hurt. And that hurt mattered more than losing every dollar she owned. Margaret leaned closer. "Every laugh, every walk, every quiet night, that was me. The money was the lie, not the love." She waited for judgment, for bitterness, for rejection. What she got instead was silence. Henry closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I spent my whole life feeling small," he said. "And when I met you, I finally felt chosen, not rescued. Just chosen." He paused, breathing carefully. "I don't know how to feel about the rest yet, but I know this. You sat here all night holding my hand when you didn't have to. That counts for something." The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Margaret, the board is waiting. The press already knows you're hospitalized." She turned to him, calmer than she'd ever been in any boardroom. "They can wait. This is my husband. This is my life." And with that, she dismissed the world she once ruled. Nurse Elena watched from the doorway, eyes shining. She hadn't exposed Margaret to cause pain. She had done it to give Henry a choice. And now, for the first time, he truly had one. Recovery wasn't easy. Trust doesn't heal as fast as bones or hearts. Henry asked questions, hard ones, about why she tested him, about whether she would have told him if he hadn't collapsed. Margaret answered every one without defense. Some nights he turned away from her. Some mornings he reached for her hand again. Love after 60, she learned, isn't loud. It's patient. It's earned again and again. Months later, when Henry was strong enough to walk on his own, Margaret made another decision. She moved them into a modest home near the hospital. No mansion, no gates. She still ran her company, but she no longer hid behind it. And Henry, knowing the truth now, stayed. Not because of the wealth, but because he chose her, eyes wide open. One evening, sitting on the porch, watching the sun drop low, Henry said, "Funny thing is, if you'd told me on day one, I might have walked away." Margaret smiled sadly. "And if you walked away now?" He squeezed her hand. then it wouldn't be love. So let me ask you something, and really think about it. How many people in this world love us for who we are when no one is watching? And how many chances do we miss because we're afraid to be seen? If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that it's never too late to choose honesty, to choose love, then take a second to like this video. Share it with someone who believes they're too old or too broken for something real. And if you want more stories like this, stories that remind us what really matters, subscribe and stay with me. And tell me in the comments, would you have stayed if you were Henry?